those other guys.
The Finger.
You're listening to Z-Talk Radio Network.
I am living on Channel Z.
You're listening to Z-Talk Radio Network.
I am living on Channel
Z. Jeff, I'm just going to put you on speakerphone. Can you still hear me?
I got you perfect.
Awesome. Let me just get the guys in the chat room. So, here we have Jeff Mudgett, author of Bloodstains, and great-great-grandson to the infamous HH Holmes, who was America's first documented serial killer. And, how you doing tonight, Jeff?
Hey, Chris, I'm fine, and before we start, let me apologize for messing up the time on our interview. You had everything right, all your details were right on, and I screwed it up by an hour, and I want to apologize.
It's quite all right. I'm just glad that we were able to get you on, because this is a topic that has fascinated us. When I was even younger as a kid, I would always read all these different books about serial killers and always try to understand why do they do this and how do they do this and all these different aspects of crimes and this and that. And when we were actually in Moravia where we met you, the first day I didn't even put two and two together, and it was just like a weird coincidence. At night we went back to the house where we were staying, and Ryan, one of our investigators who's here, his cousin goes, I want to put on this documentary, I want to finish it up, I've been watching it. And it was actually about HH Holmes. And one of our investigators was like, the great-great-grandson or something, he was at the convention. And I was like, oh my God, he better be here tomorrow, I have to meet this guy, this is huge, because I knew the entire background, or what I thought was the entire background of H.H. Holmes until reading your book.
Hey Ryan, how are you?
Hey, what's going on?
I remember that too. It was, we had a lot of fun. Not many people showed up at the conference, but I certainly remember meeting some great people and having a good time. And
it was a good time.
The way you all responded to the book and shaking hands with me, it was a lot of fun, and I'll never forget it. I can still picture you guys coming up and pretty much shocking me with your stories of coincidence, watching the story the night before and then saying, we recognize that guy, he's at the conference.
It's funny because I'm not a huge reader. I was saying to everybody before, I have no idea how I got through college, but reading your book, I started it right after we talked to you. I went and sat down in the book. Before we even left that day, I had read 50 pages of it, and in 3 days I read your whole book, and there were points where I was at shows where my father, he's a drummer, and he was playing, and there was nothing taking me away from that book, even with loud music next to me.
I have a crystal clear picture in my mind of you across the auditorium at the table by yourself reading the whole day.
That was him. That's Ryan.
I can still see it very clearly, and Tracy and I had a good time with you reading over there.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. I mean, it's funny. It's interesting because that book it really put a whole new light on people for me. Going through it and reading about your own research and the things you'd have found, and it's like I can't believe there was a person like that out there.
And I'm glad you put it like that because if people want to read about how many people he killed or how he sliced their stomachs open, that kind of thing, they should go to other books.
Yeah.
Mine is more about his character and the ways that human beings can fall into traps with a man like him if they're not careful. And that was my whole purpose in writing the book, to pretty much put out a warning that pure evil exists out there, and it has nothing to do with being a psychotic or having a mental disease. He was born that way, and he loved being a serial killer.
Yeah. It's funny, like, the last hour I kept saying to everybody, and we were just trying to give an introduction, and I was saying, I don't want to say too much, to our listeners, because I don't want to give away the real awesome parts of the book, but there were so many parts in there that I was just killing me I wanted to talk about. And I remember, not to give too much away, but I remember the part about the priest when he was younger, and that really jumps into my head about him being born with pure evil.
You know what, Ryan, and don't talk about anything in the book you want to. Don't worry about giving too much away in the book. I really don't think my book's like that. I think someone enjoys reading it. Even people tell me they read it 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
And so let's go ahead and talk about it. Don't hold back, because I love Q&A, and I love to discuss what comes out of the book when you step into my shoes as you read it. And then I got to tell you guys, I've got so many new things happening about the story that are emerging. Your listeners almost have to buy the book just to know what's coming on TV, national television, about the story.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned to us while we were there that you were in the process of trying to, I suppose, raise money to try and exhume that alleged body of HH Holmes.
And I'm glad you brought it up right off the bat, because I've got one of the big cable companies. They've called my bluff, and they're willing to pay 80% of the cost of that exhumation and then the DNA testing on the body in the concrete.
Are you serious? Wow.
So I have to come up with that 20%. So I'm gonna ask your listeners for a favor right now. Buy a copy of the book. I'll sign it for you. I'll tell you that you're helping me rewrite history, but they're demanding that I put up 20% so that they know it's not baloney, which I understand why they'd be there. It's a scary thing for them to put on TV.
Right.
They don't want to do another Geraldo Rivera thing.
Right.
Well, actually...
And that's exactly what they told me. They don't want another Geraldo Rivera thing, and I said, you know what, I understand. So in the next 2-3 months, I've got to sell a couple thousand extra books, and if your listeners can help, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, me and you actually had we were talking in Moravia, and you had asked if we wanted a personalized copy or, just a generic one, and we had actually all chosen a personalized copy. And I was saying to the guys, like, I would love to get another copy as well, just to have, because this one I have on my shelf, and I was reading it, and then I was like, I don't know if I still want to, like, bring it back and forth because I was going to work or reading on breaks. So I also bought the Kindle version as well. So I've been going back with the 2 of them, but I was like, you know what, I want to buy another copy of the book. So actually I know that SOP will be making probably a few more purchases of the book for ourselves too.
Yeah, I have the Amazon copy as well on the Nook, but I'm also going to get it in hard copy too. It's always good to have, the actual book itself.
You'll probably make up that 20% with just Shadows of the Paranormal purchase alone. So I have a good feeling you're probably going to hate it.
And I tell you, it's going to be a book that you enjoy having on your shelf when next year is over. I tell you, we're going to rewrite history. I tell you what, you want to hear something exciting? I was just called to come speak next year in Scotland in the biggest true crime conference of the world, in front of thousands, and the BBC, about him being Jack the Ripper. And then they're going to put up 3 or 4 of the big authors about about the Ripper, like Trevor Marriott and those people. And we're going to have a debate up on stage. And I tell you what, if those people, I feel very confident about it, those people don't study up about my evidence and facts, they're going to get their tail end kicked in that debate right in front of the BBC.
Right. Now, it's funny because and it's, like I said before, your book has changed the way I really view things, and a lot of, I guess you could even say, the issue of Jack the Ripper. I was watching some local channel show about some scientists trying to figure out who Jack the Ripper was, and they had pegged some, I believe it was like a German seaman who was in England at the time and came to the United States. And the whole time, I have to say, and I think it's funny, I was sitting there chuckling, just giggling the whole time, like, I know who it is. But
I'm glad you brought that up, because I just had a chat with the author of that theory.
Right.
And it's good. It's critical for my theory, because what it does is it establishes 2 points that I need to have proven. One, that the Ripper escaped London through crossing the Atlantic into New York, which we all know is true now.
Uh-huh.
And then the other part is that that Holmes wasn't building his castle the fall of '88. He didn't start building it until the spring of '89, and we have dates about that now. And so I tell you, we're right there. And then what that author had trouble with, and he and I talked about this, was his Polish sailor cannot have removed women's uteruses from the bodies of the first 2 without damaging the rest of the organs. And we had on my show, The Mudgett Report, we had a surgeon call in who said he wouldn't have been able to do it himself. Someone that could have done that in the dark in 4 or 5 minutes time had to be an expert. So we're right there with who Holmes was.
Right.
I think that's almost kind of, what your book a lot talks about. It's almost rewriting history, and I think I just find that to be completely fascinating. All the the evidence and research that you've done. Really, it's really just kind of turning history on its head. And I think as paranormal investigators and just researchers in general, if that's something that we can do, that's to really get at the truth. I think it's great, and that's kind of what your book is. It's trying to find the real truth behind it. We need to find what really happened.
Well, when you guys came up and introduced yourselves, I could tell you were a lot like me in that the search for the truth fascinates you guys just like it does me. And I don't care if I make a fool of myself. I need to find out the truth on something like this, and having the opportunity to do it, having been given the material that the rest of the world hasn't seen, gave me, a perfect opportunity. And it's something that, tell you what, I think I was destined for it my whole life, and I was just kind of waiting for it to happen. And I'm thrilled that it did. And now I've got my entire family behind me. They've changed their minds. When I first started writing the book about who we were and who we were descended from, they were all upset about my story and my book as publishing it. Now they're on my side, and they're 100% behind me and helping out any way they can.
Excellent.
That's awesome to hear. That's definitely amazing, because it's something that your family wasn't expecting. You guys were expecting, to go through your bloodlines and find out your ancestry to the Civil War, and you ended up finding something totally different.
Exactly right. My grandmother, as I explained in the book, and like I said, I don't. Let's not hold anything back from your interview. As I explained in the book, she thought we were descended from General Robert E. Lee, and hired a very expensive genealogy company to track it down. And they came up to her and used that old phrase, "Let sleeping dogs lie," because it's not the Confederate general. It's a criminal, they said, who had been hung for stealing a horse in Arkansas. They tried to soften it up a little bit, and it didn't work. The family found out about it, and then my grandfather had to admit the secret he had kept from all of us, including my grandmother, for 60 years.
Wow. Now, try to backtrack a little in your own words. What was this like for you? Finding out this information, and how did this affect your family initially? How did it make you feel?
Well, imagine you guys are at the dinner table with us, and I'm sitting with my brother on one side and my 2 cousins on the other, and they're football players, they're baseball players. When it came out, we punched each other in the arm, and we're making ribald jokes about it and trying to laugh it off. That night when I went home, started trying to contemplate what it meant, because it hit me right between the eyes when I had some time alone. And I remember going to my father, who wanted to let it go and just keep on going with life. We both knew that the family, after the big Holmes trial at the turn of the century, had moved out to California to get away from the stigma. But when I explained to him that, listen, there's books coming out now about it. Warner Brothers is doing a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio starring HH Holmes. There's no possibility of running away from it anymore. The name Mudgett is going to be recognized all over the country, if not the world, and we need to get out in front of it and figure out what the truth is, what history we can establish from facts, not just some author deciding what he thinks sounds good in a book. So, we went back and forth about it for a while, and then he came to my side, and he's, like I say, 100% behind me now, because he recognizes that, with a show like yours, I get to stand up and now tell everyone, yeah, sure, this is the most evil man that ever lived, and he's my genes are from his pool. But it also proves, look at my family, they're all good, law-abiding citizens. They're successes. They've been war heroes. None of them have gone to jail. They're all good people who you could trust if you had an emergency, a fire, or something like that. And it proves that human beings, it's irrelevant where you came from, what genes you have. It's the choices you make in life. Now that my family sees I get to say that a lot, they're behind me.
Right. That's actually really good. I mean, that's all you really need. Your family is everything, and it's good to know that they understand that, and that it's a good lesson for a lot of people that no matter what happened in either your past or the past of your family, it has no bearing on what your life has become. It's your choices. It's your decisions.
No, I tell you what, as I write about in the book, there are things, there are idiosyncrasies in our family. There are instincts which my dad and my brother and I talk about once in a while, and we recognize where they come from. We don't like them, but they're there, and we've controlled them. But I don't know. I think it's a great study for a professor or something at a college teaching humanology or something like evolution, just to run it down. And it's amazing to me, guys, how this man, this monster, went for almost 100 years with nothing being written about him, a complete secret, when he was the blank check of evil. Right.
Now, I have to ask, what was it like finding the infamous, I call it infamous after having read your book, those diaries that you had found? I believe it was in your garage.
It was given to him.
And here's, for legal reasons, I have to answer your question like this. My story is about my grandfather leaving me diaries from the killer,
right,
and then writing about tracking down what is true in them and what is not, because as you know, this man was probably not only the most prolific killer of all time, but one of the most prolific liars of all time.
Right.
One of the things that I've learned is any time there is a fact or a conjecture about him, I don't take any of them for granted anymore. I run them back, and if he had anything to do with them, like in his interviews in prison with all the big newspapers while he was awaiting execution, if they have anything to do with him having made a statement in his jail cell, they're lies. And you can track it down and prove it false. So we did that. So your question about the material and my story, it was chilling. And when you start the book, you'll see, and you remember, I thought they were phony at the time, and I ran down the handwriting to see if I could establish the truth and the veracity of the material.
Right, right. Now, you believe that there's two diaries you had mentioned, correct?
Yeah, there's material some homes that had never been seen before that my grandfather had kept a secret, and he left them to me when he died in his tackle boxes, his fishing tackle boxes. Yeah.
Right. Now, you believe that some of that was written allegedly after his hanging, in quotes?
Next year, we will prove, when we exhume the concrete. Right now, we're working with the Natural History Museum and the Smithsonian. I think they're going to take possession of the concrete and the remains. They're going to ship them to D.C., where experts are going to open it up and do a DNA analysis with using my tissue to establish whether it was Holmes that was hanged or not. And then there's no doubt in my mind it wasn't him. When you read the book, you'll see why I take that viewpoint. I even think I proved it already, but that DNA analysis will. That's one of the great things about the story, guys. So many books now are written about history, where an author puts together some things, throws out the facts that don't work with his story, fudges some of the ones that do work with his story, and comes up with this. Like Pearl Harbor, the many theories and stories about the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. This one is great because no matter what I say, no matter what I try to prove in my book, it will all come out 100% next year when the DNA analysis is done. And to me, that's just I'm relieved about that because I don't mind. If it comes out that it is him, I'll stand up and apologize. It's not going to be him, but if it is, I'll apologize. When it isn't him, then everyone's going to have to start taking my viewpoint on a lot of other issues in the book.
Right. Now, it's incredible, really. I mean, what that would mean. I mean, if it's absolutely 150% proven that it's not him down there, then it becomes perhaps one of the biggest, I guess you could say, blunders by, American jurisdiction ever.
It will be an incredible game of chess that he played. You remember when we discussed him talking to the New York Times about how his face was elongating, how his appearance was changing day by day in his jail cell, and how he was starting to look like the devil. Do you remember those quotes in the articles?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, when you go back, when you take my position and then go backwards in the book, you'll chuckle about it because you can see this is a man with one of the highest IQs ever recorded playing a game with the ones who thought they had him incarcerated. He wasn't. He was playing his game. He had it all figured out. It was like when he built the murder castle.
Right.
He figured that out years before the World's Fair came to Chicago. He knew exactly what he was going to do, where he was going to put it, the design of the hotel and the torture chamber, all of that. This was a man who, the term premeditated, when you think of premeditated murder, this is the one that took it to another level.
Right.
Now, in the book, right off the bat, you pretty much say that, you're not really, you're not like really into the paranormal. You have this search for truth. You want to put out real information, real evidence. But also in the book, you also kind of mentioned that that Holmes had this supernatural ability. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about what you meant by his supernatural ability?
I'm not. You all could fill your listeners in more on what the paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual are. I'm still struggling with those terms. I know what I felt in the basement the first time I went into the post office, where the murder castle is. I know that I had never experienced anything like that before. I don't have any doubt whatsoever there is an energy down there. How you define what that energy is, I don't know. I didn't see ghosts floating around like you see in the movies.
Right.
But there is something there, and I'm hoping we get to show it. We'll be down the first or second week of September. We're waiting on the final say from the post office now to take teams down there with some of the best electronic movie equipment, audio equipment in the world to see if we can record, that energy that I felt down there. It's the place, the Harper's Magazine said, if ever the paranormal is going to be proven, it's going to be at 63rd and Wallace. I mean, they made that quote. So we're only about 5-6 weeks away from giving it a try.
That's incredible. It's just, I can only describe the topic as incredible. I mean, this is, obviously you spoke about, a person who had an IQ far beyond really the average person, and that really, it almost gives him these abilities to just manipulate. And I know, having, read about him through you and a couple other books at this point, that he had these almost superhuman abilities of like hypnosis and manipulation.
He was a master of hypnotism.
Right.
He could seduce. Well, I hate to say any's too big a word, but women were just victims of the man. He was very elegant, glib, and attractive. He could have been a movie star if he wanted to be. I always tell the story in my interviews about when it was reported that he had over 200 mistresses in his life. He had 6 wives. One was legal, but he didn't really care about law and order.
Right.
When they announced his sentence at the trial, and they led him off, the New York Times wrote about 6 women standing up behind him as they walked him off, just bawling tears about this man who they knew exactly what he was, yet they loved him with all their hearts. And to me, that may be the most amazing part about the whole story. How could these women have loved this monster knowing what he was?
Right. Yeah, you almost can't believe it. I mean, I have, reading through the book, halfway through it, it got to the points where I was just like, this guy is, it's almost like reading a fictional book, because you just almost can't believe that somebody is that, I don't know, powerful really in his abilities.
And you bring up a good point. It's based on a true story, because I can't prove everything that I wrote in the book. There's a lot of it about the supernatural, about spiritual, about voices in my head because of my condition, and him manipulating where I was going. And those things a reader needs to stand up and decide whether they want to believe those as real or not. That's why I give them the choice in the book. You can believe the paranormal and the energy we're talking about, or you can believe what my neurologist said, that this was a normal thing that happened to me because of my epilepsy, and the voices and the visions and the things that happen to me in my life are what happens when someone is suffering from seizures. So I give my reader the choice to go take which part of the why in the road they want to take. But then, as you guys know, at the end of the book I explain there's some facts at the end which make what the neurologist said impossible, if you ask me. So
right.
That's why I left the book. We talked about it for months with my friends, and then with a lawyer friend in Hollywood about calling it fiction or calling it nonfiction, and we all just decided let's just go based on a true story, and then let my readers decide.
Right. Now, I have to ask too, and it's funny, forgive me for jumping around a little bit, Jeff, I just have so many questions, but I found it incredible at the end. You talk about how there was such thing as what people called the curse of HH Holmes. And having read your book, I find it hysterical at this point.
It's an amazing thing. The New York Times wrote about it for years after. My good friend in Chicago, Adam Selzer, I don't know if you all know him, he tracked down the Holmes curse name by name and came up with 40 who he could identify as either having died, been murdered, or suffered terrible misfortune after the quote-unquote hanging of Holmes. When you run it down, I knew that there was something funny about the whole story. I didn't believe in a curse. I didn't believe in a man being hung and then going back and visiting the people that irritated him because of his arrest or the trial or the execution. When we ran it down and started working through that list, it's kind of like the story we're working on about Holmes not being in the concrete. It comes very close to proving both sides of the story at once, and I can't wait to show that it's not him in the concrete, and there was no such thing as a Holmes curse. This was that man going and visiting the people that upset him.
That's incredible. I mean, now I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe you had mentioned at some point in the book that, or maybe it was Holmes' words, a rate of which he was, disposing or killing his victims. How many people do you think that he really killed throughout his tenure? There's that famous confession he made to the Chicago papers about 27, which Eric Larson threw that out. Eric Larson, the author of The Devil in White City, thinks it was over 200. When you start understanding what was below that hotel, the murder castle, and that factory of death, how it was built from the start to eliminate human waste after a murder, then Adam has found out that Holmes also owned a glass factory in Chicago. And at the time, to make glass, you needed the highest, hottest temperatures in the world. Right.
It wasn't for Holmes to make any money with glass. So when you ask about how many he murdered, people laugh at me when I say I think it's over 1,000. I wouldn't be surprised if it was many over 1,000, especially when we prove that it's not him in the concrete.
Right, yeah, that's something to take into consideration.
And that's one of the biggest things, because you got to figure, yes, throughout his life he did have, money to have, a building built, a murder castle built, and to purchase his glass factory. But, even if, you never know, because, every person is different, but you got to figure, do you think that he would really spend that amount of money on 27 people? So right there, to me, doesn't make any, yes, he may have confessed at 27, but, I'm up in higher numbers than that. I can't imagine him only stopping at such a low number for him.
You know what, my friend, in all the interviews I've done, you're the first that brought it up in such a way as you just stated, and it's brilliant the way you said it. Exactly right. It doesn't make any sense for 27. He wouldn't have needed to spend any money to do that. He could have done it the way a normal killer, serial killer, like the highway killer in L.A. or something. You're right. He had a system that was built to murder far more than 27.
Because to me, it's sort of like I don't know. The way I picture this building, and from watching the documentaries, from looking at pictures of the schematics and pictures of buildings, and reading your book, and doing my own research and reading books about serial killers and this and that, it was kind of like he had his own assembly line for just murdering, like his own factory. It was a murder factory. Everything, he had a step and a process and a room or a shoot or this or that to just make his whole process so much easier. And if it was going to be such a little number, obviously to us, killing 27 people, that is huge. But he could have done that in their own homes or in a normal building, not needing to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on these different locations. And it just, to me, that's the part where I'm like, there's no way, to me. Unless he was here in the flesh telling me, no, seriously, not lying, I swear on everything that is holy, I would never believe that, it'd be a number like only 27.
I don't know if any of you remember the quote I put in the book. I don't remember exactly what page it's on right now, but there's a quote where he made a comment to himself. He was basically addicted to murder, and he made a comment about how on the ship to London from New York, it was 7 or 8 days, and he made a statement saying that him having to go 6 days without murder was very hard for him to accept, and his body was fighting the issue. And when you run 6 days out over a calendar year and then over 10 years, you come up with a pretty large number.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you had mentioned also, there was a part towards the end of your book where you mentioned basically following, I believe it was clues back and forth. I believe your grandfather had left you, and you had put there was a picture of a building, I believe it was in California somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, that looked exactly like Holmes's murder castle in Chicago.
Great point. Wait till when History Channel comes out with, they have a new series starting up, and the Holmes and Bloodstains are going to be their premiere show. When the executive producer, I told him about going to Port Costa in California and going and shooting the Burlington Hotel there along the Sacramento River. You still there?
Yep.
I'm sorry. I thought my phone was giving me energy warnings. I think I'm okay. But when he took his film crew from L.A., Hollywood, up to the Bay Area there, and they filmed the Burlington Hotel, he called me and said, "You got to be kidding me! This place is exact as the pictures of the murder castle." And he said it was here 2 years earlier, and I said yes. And then read the book and see that Holmes was out there, and he was attracted to the design.
Right.
So that's going to come out on the History Channel here. He promises me within the next 3 months, but I'm not sure when it exactly will come out. When they give me the date, I'll let you all know so that we can all watch the show. They took me down into the basement at the post office. We walked around, they filmed it all, and then they went out to New Hampshire and filmed his childhood home, the church that I wrote about in the book, and the elementary school where he taught before he left for a medical school in Michigan.
Right.
I was actually on your website, and I was looking at the gallery page and looking at his house, and the house that Holmes grew up in. Someone lives in there currently now.
They're fixing it up. They're making it a bed and breakfast. I was in it. I went up into the attic where Holmes used to be locked when he was punished. Stained glass still. That was very old glass in the cross of the attic. Fixing the house up. They're going to rent rooms out. They think that it's going to be very famous when Warner Brothers comes out with their movie about Holmes and with Leonardo DiCaprio. My friend at Warner Brothers told me that it's their biggest blockbuster in a long time. They're spending a lot of money, and they are really excited about the project.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's you got to figure when you think of serial killers as a whole, or you got to figure. The thing is, a lot of people, and I never understood this, and we had this conversation before as well. If you look at like the top 10 list of top 10 serial killers, HH Holmes doesn't even make these lists. And the thing is, if you want to go for numbers, he's probably more than all the other ones on any list combined. And as far as like Warner Brothers, where if you got to figure Jack the Ripper is the #1 known worldwide. Out of anybody, any type of murder, everybody knows the name Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, that's still one of the most. What's the phrase for when you go into the internet and you go into Google and you go to a certain subject and you hit it? The link is still one of the highest of all links, and we're talking about murders that happened 100 and 130 years ago, 125 years ago. It's known throughout the world, like you say. And when we come out and establish that it was a doctor from Chicago, I think it'll go even with a higher temperature for quite a while.
Right.
If you go to Google, type in Jack the Ripper, the results, it says about 10.2 million results.
Yeah, right.
That is huge.
It's you still have people that's especially in the UK. When I go on shows a lot and we talk about the Ripper and Holmes, we get some angry calls, mostly from the UK. People yell and scream and call me names. We talk about the evidence, and then almost 100%, by the time they get off the phone, they're apologizing and scratching their head with comments like, I'm going to take a look at that. That's all starting to make sense. So
Right.
it'll happen. We'll turn the page and show people that now there's evidence, especially the evidence of the handwriting,
Right.
with the Ripper letters, and then the notes that Holmes had when he was in prison.
Right. Now, I have to ask. Now, for me, reading the book, and sorry, like I said, I'm jumping around, but I have so many questions. I could probably annoy you for a good 4 hours if I was sitting with you. But
I'm having fun.
But the most bone-chilling section of your book or area for me, and I was hoping maybe you could explain this to us, is the section on him and his priest when he was little. I remember reading through the book and reading his response to the priest after the priest had done what he had done to him, and thinking, wow, this is far worse than any human being I've ever heard of. Maybe you could explain to even our listeners that scenario and what your thoughts are on it.
I went round and round with myself about whether I wanted to even put that in the book. In the end, I knew I had to, mostly because it proved how, when he writes about it on the quote on the cover of my book, where he was born with the devil in him, I think that part of his life proves that to be true. What 6-year-old do you know could have reacted to being raped like that?
Right.
And then instead of running home to mom and dad crying, he turned it around and used it to his advantage at 6 years old.
Right.
I don't know if that's ever happened in the history of mankind.